Hey YouTube, Captain Marc here from King's Landing Sport Fishing, and today I'm doing a bit of a different video. Last night, Friday, March 5th, I was involved in a Facebook Live virtual, call it question and answer period or question and answer seminar with the Ontario Sport Fishing Guide Association that I'm a member and also a member of the executive team on. I did this session with three other members of the Ontario Sport Fishing Guide Association and recorded it, and want to share this with you guys on my channel. It's a great way to learn, and there was some fantastic information from call it the four captains in this video. The video is it was a question and answer using Facebook Live, and we asked our participants to actually submit their questions. So the questions we answered were actually real questions from Lake Ontario anglers. So real goods of what people wanted to know. What I've done for you, though, because it is quite a long video, is I've used the chapters feature of Facebook. So if you look at the scroll bar at the bottom of this video, you'll notice there's these little dashes in it. And as you hover over those dashes with your mouse, what you'll notice is it'll pop up the question. And what I'm doing is I'm basically making sure there's chapters for every single question. That way, if you want to skip along, you can do. And you can find the questions that are of interest to you and get the answer from these captains. Or, if you've got time, grab your favorite beverage, sit on the couch, and, we've got 2 hours of great Lake Ontario salmon fishing content for you. And while I say Lake Ontario, a lot of the tips, a lot of the tricks that are shared in this video, they'll work across all over the Great Lakes. So before I do start the video, big shout out to the three captains that did this with me last night. First, Shane Thombs from FINTastic Sport Fishing. Shane is he's a captain and guide out of, call it the south shore of Lake Ontario on the Canadian side. So he covers typically ports of, Port Dalhousie, St. Catharines, Grimsby. He'll cover Jordan, that area of the lake. We then had Ryan Harrison, who from Not Real Sport Fishing. Ryan and his boats are out of Brawny Harbor, so he covers that Burlington, Oakville, and a little bit of, call it Port Credit water. Myself, Marc Kulak from King's Landing Sport Fishing. I'm based out of Scarborough Bluffs in Toronto, and I cover the water from really Pickering all the way out to, call it the east side of Port Credit, just past the Toronto Islands. And then we've got Shawn Banks from Homewrecker Charters. Shawn is out of Newcastle, and he covers that water, and then he also spends the fall in Bay of Quinte as well. So we tried to get a pretty diverse group of captains that have experience across the lake. So, like I said, sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and enjoy this video. There's about 2 hours of fantastic questions and answers from four Great Lakes captains that are members of the Ontario Sport Fishing Guide Association. Enjoy, and let's roll the video. Thank you. We'll get started. Do a few questions to warm us up, but we are looking for the audience to fire up some questions for us as well. But we'll get started today. So bear with me while I just get us back to full screen here. So welcome to the OSGA's first virtual seminar. Today's session is going to be a question and answer period on Lake Ontario salmon fishing. And you've got myself, Marc Kulak from King's Landing Sport Fishing, Shane from FINTastic Sport Fishing, Shawn from Homewrecker Charters, and Ryan Harrison from Not Real. And before we get started, though, I just want to give the guys here an opportunity to introduce themselves. So maybe we'll start with Shawn, then we'll go to Ryan and to Shane, and maybe just give the guys a little bit of an update as to who you are, how long you've been fishing on Lake Ontario, a little bit about your charter company and the boat that you run. So Shawn, let's pass it over to you.
Thanks, Marc. Hi, guys. Shawn Banks here from Homewrecker Charters. I run a 27-foot 10-yen Pro Hunter, hardtop, great boat. I've been fishing Lake Ontario for over 30 years, but as a charter boat captain, right around 16 years now. And I started off up on Georgian Bay, where I grew up, and back in 2003, 2004, that fishery collapsed, and I slid down to Lake O, and I haven't looked back since. Thanks, Marc.
No worries, Shawn. Thank you. And we'll pass it maybe over to Ryan to tell the group about yourself, Ryan.
Ryan Harrison, not real sport fishing. I've been fishing Lake Ontario now for 15 years. Run a 34-foot pursuit. It was new to us last year, so we're still getting used to it.
Fantastic.
About it.
Excellent. And Shane, over to yourself.
I'm Shane Thombs, FINTastic Sport Fishing. I've been fishing on the lake. Well, it's been quite many years. I guess I got cutting my teeth on the charter industry, being a deckhand when I was in my teens, and I've been in the charter industry since. You can tell in my grays, I'm certainly far past those years. But yeah, no, definitely the lake. I've seen the lake change so much over those years, and it's always changing. So I'm glad that all of you are here to listen in, and also, sending your questions in, and hopefully we can navigate some of the changes that even Lake Ontario are still going through. Marc?
Perfect. Thanks, Shane. And Marc Kulak, Kings Landing Sport Fishing. I've been fishing Lake Ontario with my dad. I'm going to say on and off for about the last 30 years. I did take a break probably in my teens and early 20s and didn't hit the lake too much. I also had the opportunity to relocate to Vancouver for a number of years and actually got to fish the Pacific Ocean for the same Chinook or king salmon out there. It was really cool. Learned some different tactics out there that I brought back to Ontario. And I run a 1989 Tierra 2700 and based out of Bluffers Park Marina in Scarborough. So with that, maybe we'll get started. And we do have some questions coming in, but maybe just to get us rolling, maybe I'll fire a question to Shane. Shane is, I'm going to call him our resident, call it South Shore, St. Catharines, Port Dalhousie, Grimsby area, spring fishing guy. So Shane, for most people, it'll be the, spring fishing is exciting, but many folks don't get out in the South Shore on the Canadian side. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you'd recommend for someone new to the South Shore?
Yeah, you know what? Guys are already getting ready because we're really only a few weeks out. We're going to be setting up primarily to start with, targeting brown trout. So we're going to be fishing really skinny, shallow water, less than 20 feet of water, using stick baits and that sort of thing in shallow, looking for the warmest water we can and the water with good color. Usually that green color is what we're looking for. So it's all about, just trying to figure out where those fish are positioned. The brown trout, they are somewhat of a homebody when it comes to their habitat along the shoreline. So once you find one or two, you can usually do some circles in the area and get a bunch more in the boat. It's a blast. It's usually our first shakedown cruises that we do. And that starts for chartering. It starts the first weekend of April. So, and we're within 1 month of that now. So we'll be starting to pull the boats out of the barn very shortly.
Fantastic, thank you, Shane. So now we'll get to some of the questions that are coming in, and one of the first questions we've got from Jalen Holder. It is, do most of you typically always run a large paddle on a fly versus a rotator? So I guess the question really is, how do we like to run our flash or fly combo? What do we use with the flash or flies? So maybe Shawn, Ryan, you want to start with you guys?
Sure, I normally run spin doctors and pro trolls with my flies.
Shawn, yourself?
I can't argue with Ryan. For the most part, 8-inch spinnies and 8-inch pro trolls, and then all the way down to like the cyclones from Lure Jensen as well. Pretty much anything in the 8-inch category on my boat, we run them off the Dipsies, off the Coppers, Leadcores. Later on in the season, we'll put a fly behind the bigger boards, but early in the season, I like to run the smaller stuff.
Yeah, I echo what the guys say. I use a lot of Pro Trolls when I'm running flies, but Shawn kind of talked about later in the season. Here's one setup I've got here. It's a Kingfisher with a fly, and a lot of people get very scared to run a big board like this, like a Kingfisher with a fly. You got to play around with leader lengths. Like I'm finding I'm using probably a 3.5 to 4 foot leader length when I'm running a Kingfisher with a fly. It's definitely not an early season presentation, but it does work. So let's look at some other questions we've got here. Next question coming in, or next on the list. How long do you like to run your Twinkie rigs and straight line off the rotator? So it sounds like it's talking about the leader length from the paddle of the rotator to the bait head or Twinkies. What's your preferred lengths? Shane, how about yourself?
For myself,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, sorry, guys. For myself, it varies, but standard would be a 5 foot lead on a Twinkie rig, 5 foot to 6 foot. But we've been known to run them all the way to 10, 12 foot. It just really depends what the fish are doing. If you're rocking them on a 5 foot lead, then leave it there. But if they're not touching that, then you're going to have to play around with things and move things around.
Yeah, I agree with Shawn there. Like I think we've all got our own preferred presentation. I personally like a long lead. I often run a 6 to 7 foot lead with whether my Twinkie rigs or my clean rigs, and I shorten it up if I'm finding I'm not getting the bites. But we've all got our preference. But I think Shawn's bang on. You gotta play with it throughout the day, depending on what's happening with your bites. And there'll be some situations where you either play with leader length or you may play with your speed as well. Ryan, Shawn, and so Ryan, Shane, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that usually maybe in the morning you can get away with that shorter lead. Sometimes those fish are a little bit they're a little more aggressive first thing in the morning, but as they start to shut down, that's when you kind of need to consider the leader length a little bit more. So you stretch it out a little bit more. So having a few leader lengths already pre-tied before going out in the morning is often handy, and you could just switch them out and go from that, like you said, a 5 foot lead might be what I start with, and then stretch it out to maybe 6.5 feet.
Yeah, Shane, it's a good point. And if I connect the dots on that a little bit to leader lengths behind the cannonball, because that's often a really similar question. Early in the morning at first light, I know myself, I'm running a short lead. Like I've got my rigs pretty close to the cannonballs, 10, 15, 20 feet max. As the sun starts to come up and that bite starts to slow down, I'm pushing my rigs out a lot more, even to the point where, sometimes I'll even start, pulling the riggers and putting out extra long lines, depending on the number of people I have on the boat. So exact same concept that you're talking about there.
Yeah, I'm usually around a 6 foot where I start off with. I usually just stretch out arm length. So if I got somebody else shorter on the boat tying them, then it could be more like 5 feet.
Okay, we got a bunch more questions coming in. So I've got where do you find salmon? It says, where do you find salmon depth-wise in the spring, summer, and fall? But what I may maybe flip this question a little bit, Shane, is if someone's new to fishing the spring, where would you recommend they start off in the spring fishing from, both what port and maybe the depths where you suggest they start?
Yeah, good question. It largely depends on how the spring materializes. Usually, if you get a cold spring or a cold winter and cold spring, and what I'm really kind of talking about is March and early April, if it still remains cold, there's ice on Lake Erie. That's kind of the most important thing to consider. If there's still ice on the eastern end of Lake Erie, it's pushing cold water down the Niagara River. And often the cold water will keep those fish further west on the South Shore. So you're looking at maybe as far down as Stony Creek or Grimsby or Beamsville. and then also Port Dalhousie if the water coming out of Dalhousie starts to warm up a little bit. Jordan Harbor is an excellent spot as well for your first few salmon bites. But again, it's all dependent. We call it the fence or the wall of cold water until at one point it starts to flip and change. It warms up to that point where the kings start to come into it and into the plume of the Niagara River, and it becomes a magnet for those fish. Usually, I mean, every winter and spring is a little bit different, but typically it's that first to second week of May is when that transition happens to the Niagara plume.
Excellent. Thank you, Shane. Okay, let's look at our next question. We got the question, what is your best downspeed for salmon trolling? Okay, let's maybe Ryan, Shawn, maybe we'll start with Ryan and get Shawn's opinion afterwards. Everyone has a different opinion on this one, I find. Let's see what we have here.
I'd say my preferred speed's usually 2.4, and then I kick it up or I drop it down from there. But there's some days where we're doing 3 mile an hour and running a lot of spoons, and there's other days where it's big paddles doing 2.1, 2.
Shawn, how about you?
Yeah, Ryan stole it. 2.4 is my starting area. Unless previously, and depending on where we're fishing and what time of year we're fishing, but historically in the spring, if we're pulling crankbaits, anywhere from 2 to 2.2 for me. If we're throwing some spoons in the spread, we'll go from 2.2 to 2.4 miles an hour on our fish hawk, and then and those are down speeds too. Those aren't GPS speeds for me. Those are down speeds, just to be clear. And then moving over to Newcastle in the summertime, most mornings start off at 2.4. From there, step it up. And then if they're not going there, then we'll go a bit deeper and slow it down. All the way down to 1.9 sometimes, 1.8.
My answer is going to feel like it's a bit like when it comes to barbecue, because I'm going to say low and slow. Like myself, I'm like a 2.0, 2.2. Typically, I set that speed up for my meat rigs. And then when it comes to running spoons and flies, I'll adjust my leaders accordingly. And when it comes to spoons, I use a lot of the hot fish spoons, and they're a much lighter blank than most spoons. So they flutter really well at that speed. But, if I was running, 2.0, 2.2 with a regular mag spoon, it really wouldn't have the action. So I've had to adjust my baits accordingly. But yeah, but don't get me wrong, there's times that I will run, 2.5, 2.7, like the guys here said, but then I have to adjust because that lightweight spoons, they won't work very well at that speed. So I've got to change up to different heavier spoons.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what I've been hearing here too. Is it really depends on, we call it program, but it's really just the kind of tackle that we're running. If we're running big blades, big cut bait setups down below, usually we're trolling slower, just like Marc had mentioned. So that down speed on a fish hawk is, for me, I've gone as low as 1.7 and got them, especially those two cold years that we had, 2015, 2014. Those cold years, we were really grinding real slow down deep. I'm talking 1.7 and no faster than 1.9. It was really, really slow. But typically, 2.0 or 2.1 is a favorite of mine for cut bait. I'll creep that speed up a little bit when we start talking about, running flasher flies, spin doctors or 8-inchers, 2.4 all the way up to 2.6 for me. And then from there, you get into your spoon spreads. And that's when I like to get, 2.7 to 2.9 max. But again, it all varies, and don't hesitate to change that up a little bit and try different things. If you don't have down speed, pay very close attention to your GPS speed and your bearing that you're going, in what direction you're going when you get bites, so that you can get an idea or try to put together what that underwater currents are. Because that's really what the down speed does. It tries to eliminate that question of how fast the water is moving below the boat. obviously speed over ground, which is your speed on GPS, is not necessarily what is happening in the water. That water could be moving. It could be coming towards you or coming in from the stern behind you, and you really have to vary your speeds if you don't have your down speed. You just vary your GPS speeds and pay attention to the direction that your boat is heading.
That's good advice, Shane, because if I can build on your comment, I can tell you when I lived out in Vancouver, the guys out there wouldn't even know what a fish hawk is, or they don't use them. They're all about their cable angle, and really the trick there is, they start making turns, and if they start getting hit on their outside line, it tells them they got to speed up, and if they start getting hit on their inside when they're making the turn, they got to slow down. So that's another thing too, like. If you're doing a particular speed, whether it be 2.0, 2.2, 2.4, whatever it is, and then you make a turn and you get a bite, pay real good attention to what side of your boat it's on, if it's on the outside or the inside of the turn, because if it's on the outside, you got to speed up. If it's on the inside, you got to slow down. So, perfect. Okay, let's see what we've got. I got a question here from Jack Robinson addressed to me, and it's asking me about the stern planers that I use. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the stern planer. Right here, this is what I call a stern planer. It's a cone. This is one I made myself, but Church Tackle make one too. Before I made one myself, I used to use a plastic bait bottle. So Jack's question was what's the size of this thing? And I'd say it's about 10 inches long, Jack, is the stern planer that I've got here. But maybe to explain for a moment why I use this stern planer. Basically, the stern planer is something I use on my shoot rod. So typically when someone puts a rod down the chute, it's often a lead core or copper or maybe a snap weight. And while shoot rods are great and they're usually pretty good distance behind the boat, you have that issue that if you get a bite, one or even a double, it's even worse almost on your downriggers and your divers. Someone is racing to that shoot rod to try and get the rod out of the water quickly. Otherwise, that king is going to get all tangled up in the shoot rod. Well, by using this acts as a float. So I let out that, I often run my shoot rod as a 5 or a 6 color lead core or a 100 or a 150 weighted steel. I let out that rod and then I clip this on, and it's like a planer, but instead of planing out to the side, it planes backwards. So I clip this on and then I let out about 150 feet of line. So this is sitting about 150 feet behind my boat. And what that allows me to do is if I get a fish on the downriggers or the dipsies or another rod, I can fight that fish underneath the stern planer. And if I am worried about it, I just flip the barrel and let the stern planer out more. And just gives me lots of room to keep that shoot rod in place. So one of the tactics I started using, I can't take credit for this. I actually learned this from Ivan Sharoff from Get It Wet, but it's been working great for me the last 2 years that I've been using this. I used to shy away from a shoot rod. Now I run a shoot rod every time I'm out there. So hopefully that answers your question, Jack. So if we think about some more questions we've got here, let's see. Here's one for I'm gonna fire this one off to Shane and Shawn because I think you guys do a lot more spring fishing, and it's what are your favorite stickbait colors for spring browns? I know it's a salmon seminar, but I know you guys fish the spring for both browns and for kings, so I'll fire this over to you guys. So maybe Shawn, I'll start with you because I think Shane's grabbing something.
Oh, I think we should let Shane go first on this one. Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, it's all right, John. Honestly, guys, stick baits, it's really kind of interesting. We take the approach very similar to what we do with walleye fishing, and we match our baits based on the conditions that are offered. So, if we're talking about very colored water, we're usually talking about painted colors, usually bright colors, especially in the spring. So those hot colors like fire tiger, chartreuse, clown, it could be bomber long A's, it could be rippling redfins. Those are really good for browns. But when the water starts to turn to that green color and start to clear, and you can actually see as far down as, let's say, 5 or 6 feet, we'll start to get into more of the natural colors. And probably, without a doubt for me, is these jointed live targets. The shallow running live targets, probably the #1 brown trout bait. Now this is the larger size, and they have a smaller size as well. When the water gets even clearer, we'll go to the smaller size. But they catch probably more browns than any other stick bait that we have running on the boat. So the live targets jointed. They're one of my faves.
Shawn, anything you'd add to that?
Not a whole lot, actually. Shane's pretty spot on. The only other one I'll throw out there, and I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the bait or not, is it's actually the Rapala BX minnow. So it's similar to the original jointed minnow, but it's got a copolymer coating. So in the cold water, it'll actually work at speeds of 1 mile an hour to 1.2, 1.3, compared to where a jointed minnow, you'd have to go to 1.5, 1.7 to actually make it work, make it dive and make it work. It's excellent over here in the springtime on the North Shore. Like, I mean, excellent for the steelhead that are hanging out in front of the rivers.
Excellent. Thank you for that response too. Okay, let's look at some more of the questions coming in here. So we've got this one's for you, Shawn, and I think it might be a joke to it, but we got to ask it. Shawn, if you can't drop it 10 more feet, do you send it 10 more feet instead?
Most definitely, Chris. Thanks for the question, buddy.
You knew where it came from. Okay.
Oh, most definitely.
We got a question from Edward. Do any of you ever try agitators off the ball? I see Shane nodding his head. So Shane, maybe tell us about it.
It's actually something that we use. We call the setup a decoy. And it really, what it is probably you've seen it on television being used in the same fashion, but it was something that we came up with even before it was mainstream on television. The agitator straight off the cannonball, not even a leader, nothing like that. Just always spinning behind the cannonball, and then with a stacker clip just above it, running a spoon. Now this is really just for me. It's for your spoon program, and that we call it a decoy, is because that flasher is bringing those fish into the spread in underneath the boat, close to the cannonballs, and then you run your spoon typically 10, 15 feet back from behind it, so that those fish will come in. See, with the attraction of that agitator, and those agitators are triangular shape. I don't have one in front of me, but they're very low resistance, so they're not going to cause too much blowback on your cannonballs. So it's decent enough to be able to run them, but they'll bring in those fish, and then there's your offering just behind it, 10 or 15 feet behind it.
Yeah, and if I can, maybe add something I do that's a little different, but I think the same concept is I've got different color cannonballs. So my typical cannonball I run is the black cannonball. I do somewhere here I've got a green POW, but I also have some of the bright silver POWs. And if I'm running a spoon program, especially, I'll have a silver or chrome, silver POW on the rigger. And then I'll have the spoon, 10, 15 feet away. And I'm using that bright silver cannonball as the attractor instead. But it's the exact same concept as running the agitator. Okay, let's see what else we got for questions coming in. Can you show us a sample of a typical rig behind your ball? Who's got a typical rig? I know I've got one, but maybe I'll see Shawn, Shane, give you guys a chance. Or is that a secret?
Go ahead, Marc. I'll get one ready.
Okay. So for myself, I'd say, I'm going to assume right now that we are talking about, a paddle rig. So typically when I'm out there in the summer and I'm running my riggers, I'm running them with meat. So I'm running big paddles like an Okie Kingfisher. This is a staple rig right here. It's a two-face. Black dots on one side, green dots on the other, and I'm running it with a Twinkie. I've got a hot fish head here with with black and green dots, and some similar just flies with black, green, and glow. You know, I'm running a lot of big paddles on my riggers. Typically when I'm running my riggers in the summer, and you know, being a charter operator, we've got the luxury of, you know, large boats. We can run lots of rods in a lot of cases. So my typical spread that I run is a 9-rod spread. So my riggers are typically fishing, and I only run 2 riggers. I took the 3rd rigger off the boat. I just found it got in the way. My riggers are running 50 feet and below. So I'm running a larger flasher because I'm using my divers and I'm using my junk lines. So my Leadcore and my weighted steels, I'm using those for the higher rods because they're further away from the boat and they're running up higher. Shawn, yourself?
Very similar, Marc. So starting in the morning, you know, I like to run a lot of meat on my boat. So whether it's a lure Jensen Twinkie rig, a homemade rig, depending on, you know, the variety of heads that we use and the variety of flies that we use. Most mornings I'm going right away to an 11-inch paddle or a 13-inch fish board. And then off my divers, I'll be running like an 8-inch board with meat as well. Most mornings I start pretty much everything with meat, maybe a couple flies off my junk lines on the outside. And in the morning, my leads are tight to the cannonballs, unless the water's super clear. But if we're out there at 5:30 and it's, you know, still dark or the sun's just coming up, we'll keep everything nice and tight to the boat so that we can get those fish and then redeploy right back away.
Yeah, the only thing I would add too is, you know, I've got another rig here, you know, black and green. Like there's a bit of a theme. I do like black and green, but as you can see, I do like pink. I like purple. You know, contrary to popular belief, I do like some other colors. But I bring you this one because this is running an anchovy. I got a fake anchovy right now, but I do run a lot of anchovy. It was actually a tactic I picked up when I lived in Vancouver. You will not find guys running strip bait in Vancouver. They're all running anchovies in the small bullet heads. And I learned how to do that and really perfect it out west. And I still do that on Lake Ontario to this day. The only thing I would add is as the day progresses, I move out from these glow paddles with crush. I'm running a lot more chrome and a lot more holographic, whether it be chartreuse or greens. I start to bring out the bling.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe a question around speed again, but I think it's got a bit of a different twist. What speed do you guys run, or does it matter when you're running a mix of boards and spin doctors? So maybe you're running some Kingfishers, you're running some 11-inch, you've got some spin doctors or 8-inch. You got a real mixed bag of gear out there. How do you handle that from a speed perspective? Ryan, maybe we'll throw this over to you.
I think that's my typical 2.4 speed that I start with those. Normally I don't like to run a mixture like spin doctors, pro trolls, and big paddles. I like to kind of stick with 1 or 2 things. But I'd say 2.4 is my go-to speed for everything, and then I work it up or down from there. We'll start doing some turns, see what rods start firing. That's
a good point right at the end. You know, talk about the turns, Ryan. The one thing I do a lot on my boat, and I know Ryan, you've been on my boat, you know I do this. I've got an autopilot that has a zigzag mode. And, you know, once I'm through that, you know, early morning, you know, crazy chaos bite, that first hour and a half when the sun's coming up, I'll try and get out of the way of other boats, and I'll turn on the zigzag mode. And my boat's constantly just doing zigzags and making turns, inside and outside turns. And I like using that a lot because that way, if I've got a mixture of paddles, I've constantly got the speed changing on the inside and outside, and the lines are moving up and down as I turn. So that's something I do a lot. You don't have to have an autopilot to do it. It's something I did before with my smaller boats, but I do a lot of turns. You know, I'm not a fan of trolling straight all day. Okay, we've got Jalen with a question. Don't see many guys running plugs or body baits on the North Shore versus other areas or other lakes. Any specific reasons? Who wants to take this one?
I'll take that one, Marc. As far as the stick baits go, like if we're talking the springtime and our crankbaits, the springtime's a little bit different on the North Shore as far as the South Shore. You know, the South Shore gets a warmer water a lot sooner, and those fish move in, chasing the smelt, chasing the aloe-eyes that are coming in. So those bites, you know, you could be fishing anywhere from 5 feet of water to 40 feet of water when you're targeting those fish, or even 50, 60 feet of water on a stick bait bite. On the North Shore, we don't find our fish in the springtime, mostly, except for a few places, in that shallow water. So that's one reason why we don't use a whole lot of stick baits in the North Shore. Secondly, the second part is plugs. And if you're talking about Lyman's J plugs and any other plug in that realm, we use a lot of them throughout the season, in the springtime, throughout the summer, and especially in the fall for those stagers. They love J plugs.
I tell you, joking aside, I know one guy that uses a lot of plugs, and that's my father. He swears by them. He'll use them all the time, and he and I get in a huge argument about it. But he loves running his plugs. He tells me he's old school. Okay, let's see what we have for another question here. Okay, maybe we'll get. You know what? We'll all answer this question, and maybe we'll start with Shane, then go to Ryan, go to Shawn, and I'll kind of close up on it. But if you had to fish only one bait, what would it be? Meat, fly, spoon, rockets, or other? So maybe Shane, we'll start with you and go to Ryan afterwards.
All right. Well, it's interesting. Because I fish the South Shore. In chartering, I mean, we have to get fish in the boat for our clients. And fortunately, on the South Shore, we have an excellent mixed bag of species of fish, which really helps us so that if, you hear the old adage that when the salmon bite is least, then you go and trout them out. So it's true. We have to adapt to the fish that are available for us, because there is usually a time where those fish disappear from the South Shore. They do circle back, but certainly we have that lull. So if I was wanting to run something, I would say most consistent for me would be a spoon on the rigger. And then you can vary that, for whatever species you're going to be targeting. That is I would say a staple as far as the most consistent for all species of fish and throughout the season. Do I like it the best for salmon? No, probably not. Probably it would be a cut bait program. But, that's really kind of where I see the most consistency. And that's really, as a charter captain, we're trying to do is get a consistent catch coming in for our clients.
Okay, Ryan, how about yourself?
I'd have to agree with Shane there. We always, as a charter, have a spoon in the water. We have a center rigger that's always got a spoon on it, and I usually have a spoon on one of the junk lines. And that's just to keep the rod firing when it's low. 2 years ago, when we had the high water levels, we ran a very heavy spoon program. So we found all the fish were in the top 30, 40 feet of water. And that was consistent all through the summer. But last year, we were back to our regular meat pattern. But we always still keep a spoon down there.
Shawn?
Well, I got too many people maybe watching, so I can't lie. I'm going to have to go and say my go-to is meat. Of course, everything has a place and a time, but if I only got to take one thing in the boat with me, I wouldn't go without my cut bait and full bait.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because and I hate answers like I'm about to give, but I think it depends. It depends on the purpose of what you're going out for, and I think it also depends at what time of year it is. If it's late May, June, even first week of July, and I'm still waiting for the fish to kind of come in bluffers, or I'm fishing somewhere closer to Port Credit or Brawny, I'm gonna run a spoon. Like that's the only bait I'm gonna take out. But if it's that early to mid July, August, and I'm the Derbies on, I can only run one bait, I'm gonna be in my low and slow program, like I mentioned, running meat, right? I'm looking for big, mature, king salmon, and I want that big one for that derby fish. And typically that's what it's going to do. It's going to be meat. So I kind of with you a bit, Shawn, but I agree. It's on that. It really does depend on I think the time of year and what you're doing. But you know, the guys are not wrong. You know, spoons can be very productive all the time. So maybe that's a good segue. I want to take a quick moment actually while we're doing this question and answer period and give folks an opportunity for more questions to come in, just to do a bit of a shout out to a couple of the great derbies that we're gonna have this year. So on the screen, I've got two of the great derbies that are going to be on Lake Ontario. And the first one I want to do a shout out is to the St. Catharines Fish and Game Association and their spring salmon derby. It's going to be a great derby. You know, it starts April 3rd and runs to Saturday, June 5th, 2021. You know, really modest entry fee from $50 for a single to you know, a boat ticket to $200. With great prizes. You know, you heard Shane talk a lot about the mixed bag, especially on the South Shore and especially in the spring. And, you know, this derby is really built around that with, you know, prizes for salmon. Salmon is definitely the star of the show for this derby. But, you know, they've also got, you know, divisions for rainbow and brown trout as well as lake trout. So, you know, if you've never, you know, entered the spring salmon derby for the St. Catharines Fish and Game, highly recommend it, especially if you're fishing the South Shore. But they do have weigh scales pretty much from Port Dalhousie all the way to, I think, Fisherman's Piers, the closest scale to Toronto. And then if we flip to the summer, you know, from June 19th to August 28th, you've got the Silver Salmon Challenge. And, you know, second year for the Silver Salmon. You know, many of us fished the Silver Salmon last year. They did a fantastic job putting the event on last year. And, you know, this year just sounds like it's going to be absolutely fantastic. You know, what you can see here is, you know, they've really upped the grand prize, $100,000 first place grand prize. And, you know, they've obviously got the 10 weeks with, you know, grand prizes for each of those weeks. You know, I think it's $7,000 a week, but don't quote me on that. But, you know, another fantastic derby. If you haven't participated in one of these, highly recommend it. You know, they're both really well organized and really well run events, and you know, really do recommend running these. It adds another element to your salmon fishing when you're competing to try and land that big fish and get your name up on the board and win the big prizes. So with that, we'll flip back to questions, but a big thank you to the organizers of both the Silver Salmon and the St. Catharines Fish and Game Spring Salmon Derby, because you know, they just create a great venue for many of the recreational fishermen as well as us charter captains to compete while we're out there doing what we love to do. So with that, the next question we've got here is, what down temperature do you target for salmon when the thermocline sets up? Who wants to take a stab at this? Shawn, you're smiling, so let's start with you.
I was waiting for Ryan to go. I need a couple of his secrets.
I fish for Ryan. I'll tell you later.
Yeah, okay. For me, when that thermocline's set up, first thing in the morning, those fish are going to be on the feed. You know, 95% of your mornings, those fish, if they're in the area, they're going to be up in the column. So 55, 56 degrees, those fish will be there. So you got to be in that water. Wherever you're marking that bait is where those fish are going to be. However, as the day progresses and you're moving into those hot days in July and August, and that bite's slowed right off, and especially if you have clear water in your area, you know, going down into the 42, 40 degree water, 38 degree water, like, you know, down 120, 140, 150, even deeper. The deepest fish we pulled last year, I think, was down 225. So they're down there, and we fish, like I fish out of Newcastle. It's nothing like the Bluffs. You got to go quite a ways out till you get to 225. But those fish are down there. They're down. It's like I think for some of the bigger fish, it slows their metabolism down throughout the day, so they don't have to feed as often, and they're down there. So, but to target all the fish, you know, consistently, I like 44 to 46 degree water.
Ryan, how about you? Is Shawn right, or you got different secrets?
I usually keep my probe at 46, and then I'll keep the other rigger down a lot deeper. And then for the upper fish, I just follow the sonar. Wherever I see the fish marking, that's where I'm going to put the other lines.
Yeah, I agree. But I agree with Shawn too. Don't be afraid to fish the cold water at times. Like I've had some of my best. You know, I remember one day 2 years ago. It was I think it was the first week of June. It's a bit early for bluffs. You know, I was out in about 250 feet of water with believe it or not, I still can't believe we actually did that. It was just my dad and I running 4 rods, and we ran all spoons with sliders and fixed cheaters. And I had the riggers down 100 and 125 feet, and I think we had like a 20 fish day. So, you know, and the water was cold. Like it was 40, 41, 42 down there, but the fish were there and they were happy to bite. Okay, let's see. You know, we got Chris asking the question. He's trying to spool up a bunch of long lines for the season. You know, how many Leadcore combos and how many color do you have on board the boat? Maybe I'll take a first stab at this. Chris, I'm going to say a lot. I think as charter captains, especially, I'm going to speak probably for myself, Ryan and Shawn. But you know, when we've got the bigger boats, you do get that, you know, extra 2-foot-itis with boats, but you also like to put a lot of gear on those boats too. So, you know, for myself, I've got, you know, everything. When it comes to Leadcore, I've got, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10 for Leadcores. You know, when it comes to weighted steel, I've got a 100, 150, 200, 250, and a 300, 350, and a 400. Some of them I don't have on rods. I'll just have the reels and I can swap in and out. But, you know, I do like to run. I run a lot of long lines. I'm a big fan of long lines to the point, like, you know, during the day or when the bite slows down, I've been known to pull riggers or pull divers and put out more long lines just to get more rods out there, depending on how many people I have on my boat. You know, if I've got only myself and 2 guests and can only run 6 rods, I'll pull a rigger or even sometimes 2 riggers to put more long lines out when the rigger bite has died off. The other thing I'd say though, and I think where your question's going, Chris, is like, you know, especially as a recreational or small boat guy, like when I ran a small boat, like my 18-foot Princecraft, I had nowhere near those many rods. I would have like a 5 color, a 10 color. And what I would do is I would use, and I've got a kit here. I got a snap weight kit from POW. I'd use snap weights and I'd let out that Leadcore. So I'd let out that 5 color and then I'd clip on a snap weight and then let out another 50, 70, 80 feet to get that Leadcore down a little deeper. You still had the effect of the Leadcore with that snaking action in the water, but you can get different depths. And I know a number of other captains that, whether it be weighted steel or with Leadcore, they'll use snap weights instead of having to have a ton of rods on the boat. Anyone else have a point of view on that?
I wanted to add to it there, Marc, is just about the size of the reel that you'll want to consider when you're looking at spooling up Leadcore. So typically, if you're looking at the size of the arbor of the reel, you're looking at something that could manage the number of colors. The breaking point is about 5 colors. So if you have a 5 color or less, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever, a 30 size reel is what you want. This one here is a 45 size reel for a Kuma. This is a Vector Okuma. And this one has 7 colors. So I'll mark each of my reels with the colors. And this is really handy because now you can store all your rods and pull out exactly what you want. You start getting bites on, let's say, a 6 color. I'll start to work round 6 and get maybe my 7 out or my 5. And therefore, you can start to kind of break down the water column into what's getting the bites. And don't hesitate to run, 2 cores on one side of the boat on planer boards. And look for those colors that are similar. So a 7 and a 6 or a 5 and a 6 on one side, so that they don't you don't have one long line and one shorter line. That's it. Just it helps with your rod management, keeping the lines from crossing one another.
The other thing I'll add, Shane, and it's a similar concept. I've got an interesting setup here. I've got a Dakota 600 with weighted steel on, and most people will say, "Wow, that reel's way too small for that," and they're not wrong. But what this is actually a 50-foot weighted steel, and then it's spooled with 19-strand torpedo wire. And I like this setup because once you've got that weighted steel, the 19-strand, it's much thinner, but combined with that weighted steel, it has the same sink rate. So basically, I can just clear my counter and let out as much as I want. So if I want it to be like a 300, I just let out 300 feet, and it's doing the same job that it would be as a 300 weighted steel. So that's something I've done with a couple of rods. I've got a 2-color with 19-strand, and I've got this 50 weighted steel with 19-strand. Okay, we got a question coming in from Jamie. What wire Dipsy leader lengths do you like to run when targeting salmon? Maybe start with you, Ryan, on this one.
I've got pretty big variety, as I'm sure you know, Marc. With wire, I actually run a leader off the Dipsy, and it'll be anywhere from 6 to 15 feet to the paddle. My braid setups, I do a clip-on Dipsy method, which I usually put about 50, 60 feet out and then clip the Dipsy on. And that's a bit more of a stealth presentation. And so I typically have one of each out just to see what signature the fish like that day. Someday you'll get the wire firing, and other days it'll be the braid. And the advantage of the braid is you can take the diver off when it gets up to the boat, and then you're just fighting the fish at that point.
Yeah, so Ryan made that crack that I know how he does it, because this is one area that Ryan and I debate a little bit, because we have quite a different tactic. When I'm targeting salmon, there's only one diver I'm running, and it's a slide diver, a clear slide diver. I like to have that stealth presentation, so I go with clear. And with a slide diver, the line runs through the diver, and even if I'm running wire, I've tied on a 25 or 30-foot braid section that I can basically have that stealth presentation with my slide diver. I love these things. I have a box full of them. Like I make sure I have enough because they're hard to find, and I don't want to lose them. That's my salmon diver. If I'm running divers for rainbows out in the blue zone, I'm running something really shiny with like a 6 or 7 foot lead because I'm going to run a spoon. But when I'm running salmon, it's all about the slide diver, because I can have as much leader as I want, pretty much, or as short as I want.
On that too, Marc, I just to elaborate on the slide diver, I particularly like using the slide diver on mono when we're talking about stager salmon. So we're talking about later in the season, fishing in skinny water, running 40-pound test monofilament line on a slide diver. You're not too worried about the divers tripping. You got a big mature king. It's going to trip the diver. No problem even on mono. But that mono allows you to get that, the cut bait program behind that slide diver, and you can set it back, 30 feet. You're still in skinny water. The diver's getting the bait. They're getting the big paddle down into the mud, and it's further away from the boat. That sometimes helps me with the stager bite.
Totally agree with you, Shane. And actually, I showed you guys the clear slide diver. I also have these mini slide divers. Unfortunately, I only have them in white, but I have a whole bunch of these too that I use, to your point, for stagers, but I also use these in the spring because I'll run like a 10-pound, 15-pound mono. And again, for those spooky fish, I can have them way behind the diver. So big fan of the slide diver, but that's where Ryan and I always argue and debate on this one. Okay, let's fly to the next question. Actually, excuse the pun. Question is, rattles in your fly harnesses, do you find they make a difference with or without them? Yes or no to rattles?
I've got rattles in some. I've got E-chips in others. So whether it makes a difference or not, I don't know. As long as fish are coming in the boat, I'm happy.
Shawn, Shane, what are your thoughts?
For me, I prefer the rattle. but quite often as a fly gets worked through the program over a couple days, that rattle's going to get punted out of its sleeve, and that fly keeps working. Most days, if you have a hot fly, it continues to go. On those tougher days when you're having a tougher bite, by all means, maybe replace that rattle in there. But for the most part, I personally haven't seen a difference between having a rattle or not having a rattle when the bite's going strong.
I totally agree with you, Shawn. Like it's funny. I was gonna say who cares, because I don't run the rattles. I'm not someone that's wants the rattles, or I must have an E-chip on the boat. I think the flasher spinning is making enough noise and enough commotion in the water that it's doing its job. So I echo what you're saying. Like, yeah, it's nice to have sometimes, but we've all caught tons of fish without them. Okay, let's see. Next question. Any of you captains use Yakima swim fish?
Nope.
I don't even know what it is, so I'm gonna say no.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
If Marc doesn't know what it is, there's no way I would.
You saying I got a tackle problem, Ryan? Okay. We got some good questions coming in. Here's one. How often do you change out baits when not marking fish? Ryan, I'm gonna give this one to you because I fished with you quite a bit.
Usually 15, 20 minutes. We're usually in search mode at that point. So we're switching up and we're constantly going deeper, shallower, looking for some marks. Also, you want to be checking too if it's warmer water, just to get fleas off your line and make sure there's nothing wrong with your bait. There's nothing worse than pulling a shaker around or a bunch of weeds for 30, 40 minutes.
And part of the question was, if you're not marking fish, you're still changing up your gear. Is the answer still yes?
I'm pulling the lines in, and sometimes I'll just make a little change on it, and other times I'll completely swap it out for something else.
Shane, yourself?
Yeah, I would ask myself two questions. Have the fish moved, or are they moving away from the boat? So those two questions, if I could figure that part out, then it'll determine whether I need to make a move, meaning pull all my gear and run someplace else to find fish, or can I make adjustments to my spread so that I can get those fish to come back in again? Often what I find, especially midday, let's say 10 o'clock through to the middle of the afternoon, your screen will start to clear out. And it's sometimes not necessarily that the fish have moved out of that area. It's just that they're simply not interested in coming into your spread anymore. So you may have to make adjustments. And that's typically where you start to reduce the number of boat rods, or rods, like for an example, your downriggers being less aggressive. Maybe your divers start to stretch them out a little bit, using maybe some more dull or more natural colors, rather than like the mirage colors flies, rather than the glows that you started off in the morning. You do some things, some adjustments to see if you can get those fish to come back in. If they don't come back in, maybe they did move. And usually you can figure that kind of thing out too, because maybe you've seen that there's quite a current on your downspeed, or that there's so much boat traffic around that they've spooked those fish off. So you got to kind of think about what that's happening too. Is where do I need to go? Inside of where the pack of boats are, outside, meaning outside in deeper water. Typically, a lot of folks will go further out. That's a great approach. Typically, get away from the boats or go inside. Sometimes that works really well too, and pull the fish off the bottom.
Yeah, it's a good point, Shane. Especially about the fish get spooked. I like to say that I fish on Highway 401, and what I mean by that is I fish the drop in front of Bluffers or Toronto. That in the when the season's on in the summer, like, it's absolutely nuts, and it's very common for the bite to die and the fish to get spooked. And I would say at that point, it doesn't matter how much I'm changing it up, I gotta go find them. They're still there. They're just not where they were. So it's, you know, either I got to push out or push in. So, and sometimes I'd say that's where, you know, and sometimes you might not be the most popular guy and you got to be careful when you do this. But, you know, if I think about trolling in front of Toronto or Scarborough, it's an east-west troll typically. But when the bite dies, I'll try to get out of the way and start doing a bit of a north-south because I want to find them. And that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go against the grain a little bit. Okay, we've got some we've got some good questions coming in. This one's a good one actually, because I think a lot of people do this and don't understand why they're doing it. So we've got Steve asking the question, why run such a big paddle when running meat? Or do you run a small paddle with meat too? So maybe I'll start with Shawn.
Yeah, I'll start that one off, Marc. We run on my boat. We run both. The year we won the King of Kings out of the Bluffs, the spring. That was all small paddle program with me. At the same time, you go through all the fish that I put, I think, on the board for the Derby, and they've all come off a paddle and a big paddle and meat. There's no real rhyme or reason. It's one, the big paddles, in my opinion, that big paddle is imitating a feeding salmon. So if you're using a 13-inch fish board or an 11-inch paddle, that's imitating a feeding salmon. When salmon feed, they slash through a school of bait, and when they go through there, they're pounding on that bait, leaving injured ones behind so they can circle back and come back and pick up on those injured ones. So if you're running a paddle, 13-inch, you know, that's just replicating a larger fish that is feeding, and the impulses that puts out is going to draw in flash and color, is going to draw other fish into the area, and then you have your wounded bait in behind with your cut bait. But at the same time, if I'm fishing less than 90 feet of water and even skinnier, but inside of 50, I like to go to my 8-inch paddles when I'm running my meat. For me, on my boat, I have a lot better luck. There's days when the big paddles will go in there, but the 8-inch paddles really work for me when we're fishing tighter water.
Yeah, I echo that, Shawn. While you were speaking, I went and grabbed a few rigs from my pile here from the boat, and you know, these are some of my smaller rigs, and these are both lightnings. I got a white lightning and a chartreuse lightning. I got an 8-inch with an anchovy, and I run these naked. There's no Twinkie flies. It's just a, you know, clean rig. I know similarly, I've got a 10-inch fish here, chartreuse lightning, clean naked rig with just a hot fish bait head. You know, I run these in the shallower depths, you know, to your point, when I'm on shallow or the top part of the water column. But I will also run the very big paddles. Like I've got a Dreamweaver Bigfoot here. That's the Dreamweaver, like 12 and a half inch. And, you know, when I run this, I want to make noise. Like this thing is down deep. Like this will be something I run 120 feet down, 140 feet down. It's a deep rigger. When I used to run 3 riggers on my boat, this would be on my center rigger down 120, 130. And it's got 4 Twinkie flies and it's got 11-foot lead on it. Like this is a very different presentation, but you know, they all have the time and place. Okay, let's see. We got some a question about colors, and Shane, you touched on this a little bit, but what colors do you run in the morning and witching hour versus during the day, when you know, during the midday? And maybe if we can elaborate a little bit, not just morning and midday, but maybe we talk about sunny versus overcast too.
Yeah, good point. It definitely, for me, if it doesn't glow, it doesn't go first thing in the morning. It better glow. So, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've been showing has glow in the dark. You glow tape on the flashers, but then you could also get into that, you know, that UV as well. I particularly like that UV when, you know, maybe around 8 o'clock, you know, the sun has started to creep up, but it's not directly overhead. I like UV for that time frame. So glow first thing in the morning, get into a little more sheen as the morning progresses. But as you said, more chromes and that sort of thing. Be careful too. I mean, sometimes that chrome, if it doesn't have like a tape on it, it sometimes will flash really bright. And sometimes on those flat, calm, bright, sunny skies, it actually doesn't seem to work as well for me. So a little bit of tape, even it could be a silver tape, but it certainly helps to cut down that big giant flash. Outside of that, I mean, obvious, staples for us is those greens and a little bit of black in those big blades as well. Same with spoons. We start a lot off with those glow in the dark, 3-hour glows first thing, and then you switch them to things like a little more of the glow, but some more greens and black into it, and then you get into the more brighter colors and more sheen as the morning goes on.
Yeah, I agree. Like I just grabbed a few. If I think about spoons, like my morning spoons are probably going to be like this is one I make for myself, a carbon 14, or like I've got a hot fish here that is always down in the morning. It's a glow with black dots and works extremely well. So that's something for me. And then as the day progresses, I'm putting a lot of color out. But what I like about some of the spoons, like this is another hot fish. This is it's like a two-tone. It's got a crushed glow and it's got a UV. And this has got a lot of color. So I can kind of leave that out almost all day. Similarly, like if I look at some of my flashers here, this is one I made that, it's got UV slick on the back, but it's got crushed glow on the front. And I can probably leave this out most of the day and it'll do damage all day long because it kind of does both. As you think about, Overcast though, that's where I do darken things up a little bit. And when it comes to meat rigs, that when it starts to be overcast, I start to run like the purples. So that's a purple and black bait head, I'll put that with again a purple and black flasher. I change the colors up and I find purple and black works very well when it's overcast. Shawn, Ryan, anything you'd add on this one?
I typically in the morning will run glow and dark. Those are my go-to things. And then as the day progresses, if it's overcast, I'll stick with darker greens, purples. But if it's really sunny and bright out, then I put all UV out normally. Say bright on bright days, dark on dark days.
Okay, let's flip to the next question we got here. So actually, you know what? There's a question I'm going to ask because I can't believe it hasn't been asked. So I'm going to ask this one. So let's just say you haven't been on the water for a few days because it's been blowing really hard and the lake's flipped. How do you decide where to fish or what do you do? Because that's a tough one, right? Like, what do you go from information? How would you orientate yourself? And maybe we'll answer this from a couple of directions. I think we've all had smaller trailable boats at some point. So what do you do if you could actually trailer your boat and actually pick a port? And then what would you do if you're stuck at your own port but you got to find fish? Who wants to take a first crack at this?
I can.
I'll take your crack. Oh, sorry, Shane.
All right. I actually have a trailerable boat, so that's kind of the advantage I would say in that scenario. Also, too, I fish both Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, so if the wind is blowing too hard for one lake, I can usually get out on the other lake if it's okay at the right direction. But yeah, as far as what to do when the lake flips now, meaning. So I just wanted to maybe explain a little bit about what that means. If you have an onshore breeze for any length of time and it pushes a lot of that warm surface water into your end of the lake. Now, I fish in the western basin of the lake. So if we have an east wind for any length of time, it pushes all that warm water and stacks it up into our end of the lake and pushes that thermocline deeper and deeper. And it often ends up pushing those fish down too as well. But the fishing could be very good. You simply have to find them, and typically you have to find them deep. But the reverse can happen where the wind is blowing that warm water away from us, and that's probably the worst scenario. especially in the Western Basin. A west wind for us that has been strong for many days, it usually it's not very good for us, especially in May when that thermocline is so thin and so fragile. A big blow will totally push that water away, and then you have that black, clear, dead water, we like to call it, lifeless water, because all the fish have gone where the wind has pushed. So that's kind of the problem that we sometimes face in the Western Basin. I would say, after a blow, one of the biggest things for me would be to run and scan, run and scan. And if your boat isn't able to mark fish while running, and what I'm saying about running is typically you want to run at about, let's say 20 or 25, just up on plane. You just got the boat up on plane and you're able to scan. If your transducer can do that, use that and scan water. And you might not be able to mark, all the fish particularly deep, but you will mark bait. And if you mark bait, there's a good sign that you got other fish, obviously predatory fish around. So scanning, if you can't do that, certainly sit back down and scan for a little bit, pick up and run again for a couple miles, sit back down, scan, and then run up. We do that quite often, especially if there's no information. No one's been out, especially after a big blow. You got to kind of figure it out, and covering water is the biggest thing.
Yeah, a couple things I'll add to that. I'm someone that's very analytical because of probably what I do for my day job. And with that, I try and figure out what data can I get before I even hit the lake, whether I was on a small boat on a trailer or my large boat now. So I've got a few apps on my phone. So I'm not sure you can see this, but I've got like the weather boys here for Ajax and for Grimsby. I've got those. And then I've also got an app called Surfing Lakes. And under Surfing Lakes, there's a bunch of options, but one of the options is actually to get the water temperature forecast. And right now it's all blue and cold water, but I will use that after a blow to see, a combination of what is the Grimsby boy telling me for water temperature? What is the Ajax boy telling me? I'm kind of in the middle based at, fishing out of Toronto. So I want to know what the temperatures are on both sides. And then I'll look at that forecast and that water temperature forecast. And, especially, out of bluffers, if we get a north wind, if we've got good water and a north wind picks up, like our water is gone. It's out in the blue zone. And actually, I got a question here from someone saying, like, when do you decide to say almost screw it and go out to the blue zone? And I'd say, for me, fishing out of bluffers a lot of time, if we've had a real big blow, especially in north, but even in east too, that's where I'm looking at the water temp forecast. I'm looking at those two weather boys, and chances are the water is warmer out deep, and I'm either going to run out deep or I'm going to set up in 100, 150 feet, and I'm going to troll straight south. And, I'll start to look at my surface temperature, look at my probe temperature, and it's going to probably get better and better as I get out there. And when I'm out there, that's when I'll kind of flip to a Coho rainbow program in the top 50 feet. But I'll definitely put riggers, anywhere from 80 to 120, because I find that you find big kings that have, back to the earlier conversation, they're kind of hanging out in some stable 40, 42 degree water out there often. Shawn, Ryan, anything you'd add to that?
My biggest thing is pretty much just touching, again, what Shane said. If you fish the lake enough, or if you're coming from a distance, is just watch what's happening on the lake, in the area. If it's blowing 30 from the east into the west, odds are the east end of the lake's going to be a bit icy in a day or two, or even overnight. There's been many times where we've fished the King of Kings and had a blow on the Friday night and, or the Saturday, and you had 70. I remember the one year, I think it was 2-3 years ago, we had 71, 72 in front of the bluff. And the next morning, I think it was 41, 42 and freezing. I mean, freezing cold, like speaking when you're trying to put meat into the bait head, So watch what the wind's doing, and that's just to touch on what Shane said. If it's coming from the east to the west, odds are the east end of the lake's going to get iced out. From west to east, vice versa. And for me on the North Shore, fishing out of Newcastle, it's a north wind for us that messes things up quite a bit.
Yeah.
A west wind can push our water away. East wind brings us warm water. So just you got to learn the water. But if you don't have that experience, use the apps that Marc mentioned. They paint it for you. That'll give you your surface temperatures anyways. Yeah. And does one of them, Marc, also give you bottom temperature?
Yeah, the surfing lakes has the surface and bottom temperature, and then to your point, the weather boys give you the surface at that in real time. But you can also get, like, I think it's a 24-hour history. So again, you can kind of see how the water's changed. I like that because I can see if the water's warming up or if it's cooling down.
Marc, can I just make mention one other thing too? After a big blow like that, I often find the day after, even, you know, it's kind of like you're still in that washing machine kind of water. It's usually not very good. You know, I don't think the fish have sorted themselves out yet. It takes them a day or two just to kind of figure out where they need to be after the water's moved a whole lot in your area. But then after that, it's usually, you know, all guns a firing.
Yeah, no, really good point. And I use that, you know, when I got a charter after a big blow, I tell them, I say the lake's just being put in the washing machine. So we're gonna have to do some finding here, and it's gonna be a little tough. I use that exact same language. Okay, question: how critical is it to be on the water at 6 a.m. rather than 9 a.m.? What's your thoughts on this?
Very.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
For the most part, an early start, you're definitely gonna, I'd say 85% of the days, you know, you're gonna get into them. But one of my tournament partners, James Mulder, last year, everybody was coming in saying it was slow. He headed out, and that's when he got his board fish, I think around 11:30, 12 o'clock. So, you know, the real answer is be on the water. If you're, you know, be on the water. You can't catch fish from the dock. So,
Shawn, is that because James a good fisherman or lucky? What do you think?
James is a great fisherman.
I know he is. Had to take a shot there. Yeah, no, I agree with the guys here. The one thing I would say about fishing later in the day, our water on Lake Ontario is getting pretty clear. Not as clear as Georgian Bay, but it's pretty clear. And I know even as I fished out in Vancouver where the water was real dirty, I had to constantly adjust as I came back to Lake Ontario. And I think that's also the difference maker for a lot of people when they're fishing later in the day. You know, later in the day, I find your downriggers turn off. It's like they don't even need to be there at that point because they're not really doing a lot of work. So I find as the sun comes up, it gets brighter. It's not that early morning. You know, if I was only able to run 2 or 4 rods, I would, you know, if I was just with myself and a friend or myself and my dad, call it. I'll run 1 downrigger and I'll actually go to more long lines, especially later in the day. In the morning, definitely just 2 downriggers, 2 dipsies. As the day progresses, I'm pulling those downriggers and I'm running longer lines. And I've even been known to pull a dipsy and have, you know, 2 long lines, 1 dipsy and 1 rigger.
I find we usually get our first fish before 8 o'clock, you know, a couple good strikes there, and then it starts to slow down a bit. And then usually 11 or 12 is when the big boy will hit.
Yeah,
but it's usually slim pickings, right?
Yeah. The other thing too, Marc, I was going to add is the, you know, watching the lunar clock as well, your major and minor bites, you know, often on a full moon, your morning bite may not be quite that good. It could happen, you know, at noon or 1 o'clock. So you're looking at a later bite because of the full moon. But you know, it's I would say, you know, for the most part, if I wasn't chartering, if I was just going out to have a day out recreational fishing, I would be on the water, going out the marina, and there is no sign of any kind of light yet. And you know, you're getting out into your fishing spot before there's even the hint of light.
I totally agree, but I got to read a quote I saw today. It was really fitting, and you've kind of touched a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit opposite. And this quote says, there is no losing in fishing. You either catch or you learn. Either way, it's way better than being at work.
Oh, that's
So if I can't be out at 6 a.m. and I'm going to be out at 9 a.m., it's still better than being at work. But you're absolutely right, Shane. I thought it was so fitting since I saw that quote today online. Okay, Tim asked the question: do any of you backtrack on bait balls? I see Shane
100%,
nodding his
of
head.
course.
What was that?
100%. If you have bait, there's going to be kings around. They are the premier predator in Lake Ontario, and they don't get 30 pounds in 4 years by sitting on the couch. Those guys eat, and they eat a lot. So if you have bait around, those fish shouldn't be too far away.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the advantage, I think, actually, of being on a smaller boat than our larger charter boats running 8, 10, 12 rod spreads. We can't turn very tight. We're doing these huge turns. I think about small boats, or when Shawn, Ryan, when we're doing a lot of the 6 rod tournaments, like we'll spin on a dime for bait and for fish, whereas it's sometimes harder when you're running a lot of rods. So I think the small boats have a real advantage there when they're running 4 or 6 rods.
Also reading the kind of bait that you're showing on the graph. So sometimes, we call it happy bait. It's that bait that's strung across the top, and then it's very loose. It almost looks like a cloud. Meanwhile, if it's balled up and there's some movement, usually some hooks of fish coming through it, that's the picture that we want. That's a good picture on the screen. So is it happy bait? And if it's happy bait, we're just trolling past.
Perfect. Thank you, Shane. Okay, we got a couple of other questions here. Is it a must to run downriggers to catch those big kings?
Definitely not. No, derby fish we got in 2019 came off a Dipsy diver that was just 30 feet down. I think our Dipsies fire probably 2 to 1 on our downriggers on a lot of days.
Yeah, no,
I'd agree with you there, Ryan.
I agree. I think you'll see years ago, like if I think back 20 years ago when I was fishing the Great Lakes with my dad, you'd see boats that would have 4 downriggers. Some of the bigger boats would have 5 downriggers. You don't see that anymore. Like guys now run 2, maybe 3. Like I know Ryan's got a larger boat, he's got 3, but a lot of people, it's 2 downriggers. There's so many other presentations now between divers, weighted steel, Leadcore, mag divers, regular divers. You can get the job done other ways.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. It's and I went and grabbed some stuff to kind of answer this. Ryan asked the question: what have you found best for labeling your reels? For example, 3 color, 10 color, etc. So Ryan, I actually do a lot of this, so I'm going to share it with you. What I do, I use a label machine. So I've got a brother label machine here that I picked up from I want to say Staples. It wasn't expensive. I think it was like $60, and it prints these labels. And I label all my rods with this one's got 50-pound braid, but if it's a 2 color, 150 weighted steel, whatever it is, everything is labeled, so I can just look up in my rocket launchers and grab the rod that I need. I'm not sure if anyone else has another tactic. I think Ryan, you do the same label maker, I believe.
Yeah, I do.
I use just paint, and I painted on my reel. So that's my 400 copper, of course. Light course, I'll just paint it, but I'll usually paint it on an area that doesn't get banged up. That's the thing. So on the side of the line counter, for an example, is the number of colors on this rod, on this reel.
I use the same method as Shane. I use a magic marker, paint marker, and it works phenomenal to doctor them up.
Yeah, no, both work. I used to use a paint marker, and I've got some of my Akumas that have paint markers on it. As I flipped over to the Dakotas, I didn't want to permanently mark the paint or whatever on. And that's when I went to the sticker. But yeah, no, I used to use paint markers all the time. Okay, in regards to color patterns, is there a dominant color choice going into the spring, then transitioning to preferred summer colors and then fall colors? Shawn, Shane, you guys want to take a stab?
Well, I think we touched on it. Shane touched on it earlier as far as our spring colors, depending on where you're fishing. It really changes around the lake, and it's really going to be really like depends on your watercolor. You know, if you have clear water, like Shane said, you're going to stay a bit more to your natural colors. If you have nice green colored water, warm water, then we're going to brighten things up a bit. As you move into the summer months, I think we mentioned a few already, but for me, in our mornings, I like my glows, glow white tapes, crush tapes. Then later in the day, moving into your chromes and glows. And then for the fall, once again, when those stagers start moving in, a lot of times, you know, you want to agitate them, like you want to, you know, get in their face. So it brightens things up a whole lot more.
Yeah, Shawn, I agree with you about that green, warmer water. Like I do like a lot of green, but you know what? I will really brighten it up. Like there is a chrome with orange dots, you know, or a Pro Troll Wonder Bread, or like Kingfisher with orange and pink. Like people might think I'm nuts, but like I've caught some nice kings on these colors, like and you know, down 80, 100 feet. You know, I paint a lot of green stuff and use a lot of green stuff, but I use a lot of other colors too. Shane, I think you got something in your hand you want to show. I might actually I might even have the same right here, so I'll pass it over to you.
Marc and I have fished together in the past, and we fished. Yeah, there was a good number of years ago, but back then, you know, we were doing a lot of work trying to figure out, you know, fishing for cohos, and it's a lot of fun, especially, you know, that May time frame, May and early June. We have a lot of cohos on the South Shore, and we'll fish with them with typically these bright color little 4-inch spinnies, and then they're just coupled with a small fly as well. So you know, just kind of, you know, it's usually around that time where you get all of those bugs. You know, when the lake gets covered in those gnats or whatever they want to call them, those bugs, it just covers you. That's when this comes out for me. Is these little spinnies with a small little fly. This one has a little spinner on it as well, and you can have it behind a diver. So it just stretch again red. And really, it's not fishing it very deep. It's, you know, the top 20 feet of water for sure. So the diver will only be out about, you know, as little as 30 feet or as much as 50 or 60 feet. So not very far out. And that bright red color seems to attract a lot of attention for cohos, also rainbows as well.
I got a question. I got another question here that I'll get everyone's thoughts, but I want to ask Ryan, since I know I was on the phone with him. We were kind of joking around this. Ryan, when you're fishing close to the bottom, how close is close enough when it comes to your downriggers?
The probe rigger, I don't like anywhere near the bottom, but generally like to keep the cannonball a couple feet off the bottom. But when you're fishing some structure, you know, it's going to hit the bottom. So that's why we usually keep a beat up cannonball on board just for that purpose.
But I echo Ryan, don't put my probe rigger in the mud. Those fish hawks are very expensive and I don't want to lose one. If I need them both to be down there, I can clip a snap weight on or something to get that other rod down deeper. Shawn, you sound like you keep going deeper and deeper. So do you go beyond the mud?
Well, no, you can't really go beyond the mud, but there's definitely times when kicking up the mud is going to help you. You know, and that's one in the late season with some of the stagers, and in the springtime sometimes if you find yourself in a nice sandy area, and if you can throw a cannonball. Now we're not going to use our sharks down there. and we're not going to use any of our highly expensive weights, but an 8-pound cannonball and send it down into the sand and keep your spoon up above it. And that sand kicking up, especially in a bit more clearer water, tends to attract some of the browns and some of the rainbows, and sometimes the cohos will be tight in there too.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say, similar to that, there's a spot when I used to do a lot of fishing out of Port Dalhousie in the spring. There's a spot right around 55, 60 feet of water where there's a bit of a transition of depth, and I would just put my downrigger balls in the mud, drag them, but again, they were just cheap balls, spoon, 3 or 4 feet above, and it would be lake trout central.
Yeah.
But don't want my probe rigger in the mud under any circumstances. Okay. Here's another question. When the bite is shallow, do you notice fish spooking due to the engine noise of larger boats versus the kicker motor? This is interesting. Maybe to get Shawn, your thoughts, then maybe Ryan's thoughts, because I know Ryan doesn't run a kicker. He's a big boat. You've got a kicker.
Yeah. So we didn't get to fish the Spring King of Kings last year, but the year before we fished it, and we only got to fish one day, as I can recall, because day one blew, so it got canceled. But the second day, our fish were still in the same spot. So when we set up, we found them in 25 to 35 feet roughly, but the wind was still prevailing from the northeast, so our water kept getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And from the northeast, that's blowing straight down the lake, so it was blowing in hard on us, 3 to 5 footers. So I had to start the main because the kicker at that point wasn't doing it anymore. And we consistently hit fish through the day. But that was nice colored water. So, and those fish kept pinching in, moving tighter and tighter to shore as their green water got tighter. In clear water, yeah, it likely will have an effect on them, but that's why we have our planer boards to move our lines out to the side.
Yeah. Ryan, thoughts? As a guy that doesn't run a kicker, but I know you used to run kickers on your boats, your small boats.
I think it's skinny water. It definitely makes a difference, but you got to run with what you have. So it's like Shawn said, you got the planer boards to get things out and away from the boat, so you just got to utilize them.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've got a bit of a unique situation. I'm running a 27 Tiara. Most people won't put a kicker on that boat. I do have a kicker on that boat. Ryan makes fun of me for having a kicker, and when I'm fishing real skinny water, especially if I was fishing for browns or something, I'm not going to run the main. I'm not going to run the kicker because I think the kicker is making way too much noise and really kicking up a lot of water if I'm fishing in 10, 15 feet of water. But yeah, I'm gonna also run planer boards. Another thing, planer boards, small divers, get them away from the boat. My lures. Okay, we've got a question from Cher. Cher's asking a question, but she's also giving up some good information. What is everyone's go-to spoon pattern? Her choice is the Green Glow U Alewife by Michigan Stinger. What's everyone's favorite spoon? You can only have one spoon.
I'll start. Mine would have to be Hog Wild.
Okay, Hog Wild.
I think Wonder Bread's one of my top ones.
Ryan's Wonder Bread. Shawn?
Hard to say. I got so many good ones, but and really I don't run them a whole lot, but Michigan Stinger, any of the UV patterns. The black dot is probably one of my favorites, I have to say.
Yeah, so for me, probably a little different. I run the Hot Fish spoons, and I'm gonna run one of their two tones. It's got glow and UV on it with dots. I actually don't like this one's a green and black dot. I've got I got a Wonder Bread two-tone. I'm not so fussed about the dots. I like the two-tone, which is glow and UV, because if I only have one spoon, I want it to work all day. Okay. James is asking, do any of you guys use 6-inch Magnum flies? And if so, when? I don't, so I'm not sure if anyone else runs a larger fly.
I don't.
Ryan doesn't? Shane, Shawn?
I don't.
I don't, but I've doubled up flies before, so two fly bodies on, typically for stagers.
Perfect. Yeah, I fish with a number of guys, and I've never really had anyone fish with larger flies, like the larger length ones. Okay, question here is, what color weights do you run? What color downrigger balls or about downrigger weights do you run? Shawn,
I just stick with black.
Ryan's black.
Yeah.
Shawn?
I've played around with chrome, black, and then of course painting a few of my own. I haven't really noticed a difference between too many of them, and so now I just go back to the neutral, which is black.
Shane?
I got black primarily. Sometimes I run like almost a dark green, a forest green bullet ball. That's a 14-pound bullet ball. It's a nice one.
Yeah,
Green.
myself, I've typically always run black cannonballs. But as I mentioned earlier, I do have one silver one on the boat that I'll use as an attractor with spoons. But I was talking to Brad from POW, and he needs all different colors. So I've got a pair of these green ones now that he's told me I have to run this year and give them a go. I'm really looking forward to it. It's like a really nice antifreeze green. I know some folks that are color ones with good success. So I'm looking forward to trying it. But up until then, I've been predominantly running black.
I'm surprised you don't have some to match the color of your boat.
Yeah. Hey, you never know, Ryan. Okay, next question. This is a good question, and I know Edward's asking the question, do you run spoons on paddles? And you know what? It's interesting because I know Edward has spent some time out west fishing, and I spent time in Vancouver, and we'd use a lot of spoons with paddles out west. What's you guys' point of view on running spoons with paddles?
I guess I'll start.
I run out of.
Rarely do. Sometimes if it's if we have to trout them out, then maybe I do that for a lake trout bite. But outside of that, no, I don't normally.
Anyone else?
I've played around with it when we've run out of meat, but it's not a normal setup for us.
Yeah, I tell you, Edward, it's a good question, and knowing that you fished out, I want to say Vancouver Island, I think from our conversations, and I fished Vancouver out west, running spoons with paddle is extremely common. The guide boats do it, the recreational fishermen do it. I think the one I've done it on Lake Ontario. I've caught fish with it, but when I run a spoon, especially if I'm running the spoon on a rigger, I'm running 2 spoons on that rigger because I'm going to run 1 spoon on the attached to my main line, and I'm going to either use a slider or I'm going to use the fixed cheater. That's where I have a second spoon, either this same size or smaller, either floating up and down or fixed in a certain position. And I've got 2 spoons out. If I try and run a fixed cheater or a slider with a spoon with a paddle, when I'm start to reel that, if I get a fish or I start to reel that line in, that spoon that's in the slider position is going to be a tangled mess on the flasher. So that's why I don't do it anymore, because if I run spoons on the rigger, I'm running a slider program all the time, or a fixed cheater program all the time. But that is one of the unique differences I found fishing Lake Ontario versus fishing the Pacific. Okay. When searching for active fish, what is the most important variable to find if no fish on the screen, temps or bait?
What was the second part of that, Mark?
When searching for active fish, what is the most important variable to find if no fish on the screen? Temps or bait?
Mark, I guess probably I could mention that, you know, your screen is looking straight down, right? And if you're at the helm and you're searching for fish, look across the water as well. Look for feeding birds, look for slicks where the water temperature might be changing. Those types of clues will help you to maybe change the course of the boat and go to a different area very close by. You know, feeding birds is a big one. You know, if you see gulls diving and or even just they're sitting there, there's a reason why they're there, and check it out. It doesn't hurt. So if your screen is blank, try to figure out something else that will not make it blank, and go and search for them. The other part is, you know, what's the water temperature? How deep is that thermocline? Because if it's really skinny, it's really thin, the warm water up top, or the epilimnion, if it's too thin, those fish will just simply not be under the boat. They're spooking away from the boat, so you may not be reading them. They're cruising off to the side.
Excellent. Okay, Angelo asked the question, what do you do for chasers on the rigger? Drop down, lift up, speed up, slow down, or do S turns? Or I'm going to add, or all of the above.
All of the above. Check.
Yeah. What do you guys do?
Same, pretty much like Shane said, all the above. But the first thing I'll do when I have a fish coming is I'll bump my rigger a foot or two, just pull it up away from them. I have a handheld remote for my autopilot, so I can pretty much do both things at once, and it's been a very, very effective technique. And there's been a few times where that fish has continued to follow and drop that rigger down 10 feet and then bump it, you know, in 1 and 2 foot increments, and they'll go up. It'll make them go.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think all of the above is probably the right answer, but you know, I'm a bit of a techie guy, so I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to use my autopilot, and I'm going to kick that thing into zigzag mode so I'm starting to move. Or I've got a device called a Troll Smarter, and it's got a hunt mode. I'll click the hunt mode on quickly to speed up and slow down in 30-second increments. But I have been known to drop the rigger down or move it up depending on where the fish is. Okay, let's see what else we have for questions. We've got Chris is asking, what time of day are you getting your bigger derby fish, and what setup are they hitting? What have you know, either yourself personally or what have you heard? Because I know, Shawn, you shared a story not too long ago about one of your buddies.
Yeah. Just my past experience. I don't think I've weighed a fish that I've caught in the morning yet. The one fish that took first place 2 years ago was caught around 115 as we were picking lines up. That was on a high diver, flasher fly. And that same year, later in the year, stagers was an evening fish on a meat break down 95 feet. So you just gotta have lines in the water. It's a numbers game when it comes to bigger fish, quality of fish and numbers. You know, you gotta really. Some people just hit it going out, but I think for the charter guys, and I think everybody could agree, you just gotta go through work through numbers. The more fish you catch, the more chance you're gonna have of getting a bigger fish.
Yeah, I tend to agree. You know, I'll tell my dad's story about, you know, the derby fish we got. I think it was 3 years ago now. My dad and I had been fishing a number of days, and we'd done all right, but we hadn't got any really big fish. I go back to work. My dad's meant to go to work. He woke up that morning at like 7:30 and said, "Screw it, I'm not going to work." He called his crew to make sure he was in construction. He's now retired, but make sure they were good. And he drove down to the boat and decided to go fishing. Well, he was on his own. So It's like 9 o'clock in the morning right now. He leaves bluffs. He sets the rods up in like 50 feet of water, and he's just trolling straight south. He's on his own, and he throws down a couple of his favorite spoons. And I'll show this because it's so simple. I still can't believe it works, but he loves this combo, and it's he calls it his twin brothers. And really, all it is a silver spoon with holographic on it. He threw 2 of these on one rigger, and then something similar on the other rigger. So we had 4 spoons. Next thing you know, there's his derby fish. I think he finished 4th for the week, and it was like 9:30, quarter to 10. So yeah, similar to you, it's not. Most people I know, it's not been an early morning. Ryan, I know you've had a number of derby fish. What's your view? You've had a number on your boat.
Usually midday is best for us, just as we're packing up to go in around lunchtime. We did have one that was right at the end of the day, and again, that was when we were pulling lines to go in. So it makes you wonder if the less is more approach kind of really does work. We've had two derby fish when we're pulling lines, so going from 8 rods down to 1 essentially.
Yeah, that happened to me last year. Actually, it wasn't a derby fish because it was the week after the silver salmon ended, and I didn't have a boat ticket for the salmon hunt. But my 29.5 came in literally as we're pulling rods at the end of a trip, so like 11:30. Okay, let's see. What pound monofilament is best on downriggers when you're fishing for salmon? What do you guys use on your downriggers?
I use 17 pound in the spring. So that's for my spoon and stickbait programs and that sort of thing for the spring kings. That will go up in pound tests. So once we start getting into fishing, cut bait and paddles, I actually go really heavy. So I'll go to 40 pound test mono on my downriggers because really the big paddles, they don't need anything that is finesse in front of it. I much prefer to have the thicker line, especially when the fleas come. You have something that will deter the fleas from collecting as much as they would on thinner line. So that's been my approach, is a heavy line, even for the deep downriggers, using 40 pound test for that.
Yeah, I echo Shane. Like if I'm running 40 pound, like Berkeley Pro Spec is what I use. 40 pound is on my rigger rods that I'm running with flashers. If I'm running, I got 2 rods that I have spooled up with 40 pound for flashers, and I got 2 rigger rods that I got spooled up for spoons. The spoon rods I'm running no more than 20 pound. Those are much lighter because I don't want the thicker line to spoil the action of the spoon, but similar. Shane, Ryan, Shawn, Ryan, you guys similar?
Yeah, I'm a 30 pound Spectra I'm running right now, and for my spoon rods, I just put a 20 pound fluoro leader off of that.
Same as Ryan.
Okay, I got another question. This is a good personal preference question. Do you prefer copper or weighted steel for long lines, and why? I got my opinion, but I'll throw it at you guys first.
I just started playing around with the weighted steel last year, and from a charter perspective, that's definitely the way to go. But I'm not ready to get rid of my coppers yet.
Shawn, Shane, what do you think?
I use atomic copper, and so once I get past 10 colors, then it starts going into my copper lengths.
Shawn?
I use atomic copper as well. I've played with the steel a bit, but I like the copper. It produces for my boat, and if you do have to mend a knot, you can do it fairly quickly.
Yeah, so I tell you, this is where I'm going to be a little different. I switched to weighted steel 2 years ago. I can't stand copper. It's you got to be so careful letting it out, and you can't really free spool it out. I want to do things quickly. Weighted steel is far more forgiving, so I've switched over to weighted steel for everything I run right now. There's no copper on my boat. I just went to go look and see if I actually had any copper on my board. I don't even really have any copper on my board other than some old 20-pound walleye copper. Like I said, with weighted steel, I like it because I can start letting it out, and then I can just I can literally just let it free spool out, and it won't bird's nest. Try doing that with copper. It's a bit tougher. I would say there's a learning curve with weighted steel, though, right? Like it's you need different knots to terminate it. It's very, very, very strong. Like, I don't know, I think it's something like 250, 300-pound test. Like, you can't break the stuff. It does, this is my opinion, it doesn't dive quite as deep as copper, I find. So what I've done is, when I made the switch over from copper to weighted steel, what I did was, if I was having a rod that, if I like the 200 copper, I actually swapped that out for a 250 weighted steel. And a 300 copper, I run a 350 weighted steel. So I've added 50 to it when I went to weighted steel. But I made the switch a couple of years ago, and I don't think you could pay me to go back to copper. But again, it's a personal preference. And that's why I said that right when the question was asked, because I expected different answers. But like to Ryan's point, he's starting to play around with both. If you don't have a weighted steel, I recommend giving it a try. It's good stuff. Okay, let's see what we got for next questions. Let's change it up a bit. What are your better body bait patterns in the spring? Short and fat or longer profiles?
I guess I'll start with that. Just grabbing some baits while I get to it. I would break down my baits into stick baits and then deep divers. But the action of stick baits or deep divers is really what it's all about. So typically with a crankbait, for an example, what you're looking at with a larger bill like this, more like a shovel, wider obviously, you'll have an action that is more of where a wobble back and forth. The tail is wagging, almost like a Labrador retriever. And that action there is usually very good in the spring, especially when the water is cold and you want to troll nice and slow for those kinks. When you get into stick baits, it's kind of a little bit different. So typically what you'll have is what they call a body roll. So that bait will go and swing back and forth like this and roll back on its side, back and forth. And that roll is sometimes very, very good for those light biting fish. So more of an aggressive action is sometimes not what the fish want. You want to look at a bait that does more of a body roll. So a good example of that, this is a live target banana. The banana bait has that nice roll with still a bit of a kick on the tail. But yet this is a Wacom tackle custom bandit. It will have more of a tail action, more of a wobble. And certainly you can get away with, fishing this still slow, but getting some of those fish to be active and coming in to check the bait out, because it does have a lot of action as it's moving through the water.
Perfect. Thank you, Shane. I just realized the time, folks. We're about 5 to 10, and I said to the guys here we'd probably end around 10. So there's one last question, and I'm going to do a bit of a closeout here. But the last question we got, and I think it's a neat question, is what size salmon do you guys keep for the barbecue? What's your thoughts?
I didn't keep any last year, so my goal is to keep a couple this year. But when we fish tournaments, those 20-pound salmon, I still keep them and chop them up into steaks. But I'd say normally my 4 to 5 pounds my favorite to keep.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a catch and release fisherman myself, other than when I'm doing charters. And if I do keep the odd fish, I love the cohos. That's what I want on my barbecue. I'm going to eat them. Or if I'm going to keep a king, it's under 10 pounds. So super quick, just as we get ready to wrap up here, a couple of things. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to Ryan Shane and Shawn for doing this with us this evening. It's the first one we've done. The Ontario Sport Fishing Guide Association does plan to do more of these, and I know there were some requests in the comments for some targeted on walleye and bass and other things, and we are looking to engage more of our membership to try and do some of these seminars for you guys on the lake. So really great and really enjoyed this, and big thank you to Ryan, Shane, and Shawn. The one thing I would do here is I'm going to do a call out and say seminars like this are a great way to learn. But for some of you here that that are recreational fishermen and want to learn more, don't be afraid to look up our members and really booking a charter. Because I'll tell you, I can speak for myself and many of the guys that are members, and especially the guys here on the Zoom call tonight, that if someone calls us and says they want to book a charter and they want to learn, I'm happy to do an instructional charter on the water. I'm happy to do that. I use the example of when I moved to Vancouver, and I'd never fished Vancouver before. I met a gentleman called Jason Tonelli. He owns 5 charter boats in the tackle shop. I booked some charters with him and told him, I said, I'd love to learn. I've got a boat of my own and I want to learn the water. And he taught me and was happy to teach me. And obviously I paid for those charters. So don't be afraid. Another way to learn is, reach out to our members. I've got the links here, depending on what area of the lake you're on. Reach out to our members. Absolutely. And they'd be more than happy, a number of them, to do an instructional charter. But a big thank you to the guys here, and a big thank you to you guys on the line here. This has been a fantastic virtual seminar. We were worried for a second we weren't going to get any questions, and then suddenly we burned up almost 2 hours with fantastic questions. So a big thank you. Please like the Ontario Sport Fishing Guide Association Facebook page. By doing that, you'll get notifications when we're going to do other events, because we do want to do other virtual events just like this. But Shane, Ryan, Shawn, a big thank you to you guys, and a big thank you to everyone on the online watching tonight.
Thanks a lot, Marc. Really appreciate it. It's been a great evening, and I hope everyone stays safe and catch a big one this year.
Yeah, and good luck on the water, everyone. Have a good one and have a good night. Thank you.
All right, thanks.